Welcome to the Men After God podcast, where you will be challenged and encouraged as you pursue God, achieve success, and raise a thriving family. Join your host, Dustin, and his guests on a weekly journey to grow as husbands, fathers, and men after God. Here is your host, Dustin Alley.
Hey guys, welcome to a special episode of the Men After God podcast. I've got my friend James Bell here with me, who has recently started up a fantastic group for pastors and ministry leaders called the Pastors Connection Network. It's operating nationwide in the United States. It's broken down into regions for messenger contacts and personal relationships to be developed between pastors and ministry leaders. And it's really been a fantastic place for me to go to meet different people in my area and also to connect with guys across the nation on things that really pastors understand more so than what someone else might be able to understand when they're not in the ministry like that. And I can't wait for you to hear about him, his family, his heart for ministry, his heart for pastors, and what the vision is for the Pastors Connection Network as we get into this today. So without further ado, James, thanks so much for being with us today, man. Do me a favor, introduce yourself some more and tell us about your family and kind of how you got to where you're at right now.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin, for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a long time coming trying to get this worked out, so I'm glad our schedules
Yeah, man. Well, hey, and by the way, if anyone knows of an assistant, someone who's an assistant, James needs one desperately, and he's hiring.
Right. Yeah, well, I pastor up in the frozen tundra of Michigan, so depending on what you want to call north, but we're the frozen tundra up here. And so that's kind of a deterrent for anyone that's looking for a position. You know that, like they're like weather.
If they're not an Inuit, they're really not into coming up there.
Right. So we have to put that in our job description for looking for somebody.
That's awesome.
But I pastor at First Baptist Church of Fenton. So we've been here 8 years, 4 years, 3 years of it was COVID. I count those as like dog years. So I've been pastoring here for like 20 some years. It feels like.
Yeah.
So
So when did you start pastoring there?
2017. I was officially voted in. So.
All right. You had a little bit of run up, man. When I started pastoring, it was summer 2019.
Yeah.
I had 7 months, and then Connecticut was like, "Oh, hey, you know that whole church thing you do? Stop doing that." I'm like, okay. And
it was, this is like my first lead, and so it was like trial by fire. Like, I literally have a file. Like, if this ever happens again in our back office, like open the red folder, like it's there. All this
break
stuff.
In case of emergency or plague.
Yeah, in case of plague, break this open. Here's what we did.
Oh man.
So no, First Baptist is an old historical church. I think we're celebrating our 175th year. Great history. Wow. Really cool history. But as you know, a lot of historical churches over the years have had lots of splits and separations and a lot of pain, over the years. And so the church had really dwindled down. I think our first Sunday's lead, it was just a couple, it was a small group of people. And so we knew that what God had, but in that revitalization mindset. So we started to work and we seen God just really do some awesome things. And so we're thankful for that. But as soon as we started to feel like we were really gaining momentum and getting our roots into the community again, it was like COVID hit. And it was we had a really hard time through all that. And so that was a huge learning curve. And really, I think because when you're young, you're in your first church, you're like, I got it all figured out, right? And then you start passing through it, and then I realized how real burnout was, and how much I didn't know, and how much my need for mentorship, and so there was a group of pastors. We just started getting together, and it was like a lifeline for me during that time. And it was just a bunch of local guys, and we're different in many ways. And our churches had long history. Some of the churches that we fellowship with, our churches have split back and forth. And so during that time, we started joint services, and we seen members that had split from each other do communion and reconcile in a service. And I'm like,
that's cool,
man. And so this just really birthed in my heart the need for pastors to have pastors and pastors to be healthy and churches to be healthy. And so that's where really the network idea really was birthed from. And so it's been a long time coming. But we've been anyway, at first since 2017, I have 5 sons. So, it's like a little mini church, and that's chaos in itself.
There you go. That's one way to grow the church.
Yeah. And so we're a big football family. I grew up playing football my whole life, and all my boys. So my poor wife.
Are you from Michigan?
I am.
So you're a Michigan fan.
Yes. That's the only team in the state. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, University of Tennessee is playing that other team south of you. I won't mention their name.
Well,
I know how that can be. And so,
you're gonna drop your views if come in talk about that.
I know,
team.
right? Yeah, I'm really hoping we just knock them out, and then once we beat them, I'm not even saying if. Once we beat them, then we've got number 1 Oregon, and that's where I'm just hoping for the power of the SEC. You know, to be able to show up and show out and see Tennessee take this all the way home. But that would be great. Michigan fan, football. You have a football team as a family, and so that's But yeah, man. So did you grow up near the area where you're pastoring?
Yeah, a little bit further north, so about an hour or so north, of here. So we have family here, and really, Michigan's always been my heartbeat. I love Michigan. I love the outdoors. So the culture, I'm used to it. So not our family's pastor. He's from Texas and Florida, and from Florida, Texas. So but yeah, we've got him used to it now. So
did you put the frozen chosen on his his job offer? Like, hey, just so you know,
and
it's not always 60 degrees here.
The job when you got hired, it came with snowshoes.
I hope they were branded at least. Just get the right colors, you know?
Right.
Oh, man, that is wonderful. So you've been there almost 10 years, almost a full decade.
That's crazy to think about that long.
Yeah. I'm sure. And now your boys, you say you got 5 of them. What are their ages?
12, 10. Now you're going to get me in trouble. 12, 10, 8. 12, 10, 8, 5, and 1.5, 2. So,
Well, that's fun.
Yeah. So we have
and it's not like having daughters. Like, I'm sure the 12-year-old probably helps out, but it's not like having a daughter at home who's really going to help take care of the baby. This one's just going to punt him around and throw him,
it's a football game in my house. Like, there's Nerf bullets, footballs. I mean, that's our life. So
that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That is so cool. And so, all right, you grew up there in Michigan, you're pastoring there, been almost 10 years, 5 boys. This journey of pastoring over the last almost decade now, you mentioned it a little bit, you kind of get in there, revitalization effort, and then COVID. What are some of the just greatest lessons learned you have that you'd pass on to a guy who is new into the ministry, been in the ministry for a while, maybe in the thick of something? Just what are some of the biggest lessons learned you've had over the last 7-8 years?
Lead with curiosity, not criticism. Always, if I could go back and learn to ask questions, to understand my people, to let them feel heard. I feel like when I first came into a revitalization, I felt like it was up to me. This program was bad. This was outdated. This needed to change. And in being a type A driven, let's go get it type, I really neglected, I think, the heart of my people and listening to them and understanding that the richness of the heritage and the history are not bad things. They're not things to be conquered. They're things to be valued, understood, but also lead them with a curiosity, as in asking them questions and what should we do in the future, and transparency. And so when I changed really a lot of my style of leadership is to be more transparent, to lead more with curiosity, and really lean on the relational investments that I've had in my people more than necessarily, hey, get behind me, let's go. It's really much more in a horizontal mindset. And so I always tell young guys that I talk to, especially in revitalizations, lead with curiosity, not criticism. Don't come in thinking that we know the best. And each church is unique, and so what your church is, your church isn't going to be a copy and paste of what you've seen this other guy, and the problems and the things you're going to have to navigate, and they're different, and that's okay, And so,
man, that's such good advice. I mean, pastoring 5 years, I can definitely say that I, just like you, rolled in there. I've got the answers, and I want to love on you. Just follow me. Let's go. Come with me, and let's do this together. And, definitely did that for a little bit. And, within the 5 years, I think I definitely started to change that some. I think I've still got some to work on for sure. However, that is sound advice right there. What would you say to the guy? Because here's the situation, right? Oftentimes with revitalization efforts, you come in, the church is not in a good place, spiritually, financially, something.
Yeah.
It's a revitalization for a reason.
Yeah.
The curiosity without criticism is great. Can you speak on it in the context of being able to, kind of honor the past while pushing forward to the present, being able to, how do you come in there with the negative that's got them to the place they're at and help lead them out of it without being critical of it being where it was?
Yeah. Yeah. And so a lot of times we would start with one of the big things we did was like celebration Sundays, is just seeing what God's doing. And we would celebrate those things publicly. And we would celebrate, we would talk about honoring people that had served in many years of capacity. And so we started with like celebration. We started with honor, and people realized that we had a heart to see people, and we built a trust. I think developing trust is the most vital part of a revitalization. Knowing that you care for them relationally, that you love them, that you're for them, and you have a heart. And then we went after a lot of low-hanging fruit. So to develop trust, a lot of people for instance, like the first things they want to tackle is like music, right? Well, we have to tackle music. We have to change music. And I don't recommend that to be the first thing you go after. I say, go after the low hanging fruit, aesthetic stuff that's easy to, talk about, go after like website, but also lead through change. Know who the players are in the church that have voices, and, bring them along on this journey, asking them questions, valuing their input. When you have, it's kind of funny, but I remember when we first changed our website. Now, was a big deal. Well, we should have a church vote on everyone's favorite logo. And I'm going, I knew better. I knew that it was going to be a battle between clip art from the 90s and
oh my gosh, no.
And so this is really because I could have just said, no, I'm going to do this. But what I did is I remember I went out with a group of guys that I knew that had been in the church for decades. They had been there. They're the people that remain, they look to. And, and I mean, most of them were over 70 plus, probably had zero idea about websites and the importance of websites and, that kind of stuff. And we just talked through it, and I asked them questions, but that allowed them to see my heart for them, my value of their input, even though I knew, that probably wasn't their strength. But the thing that allowed me to make change in a healthy way, they knew that I cared for them and I valued them. And so I think that's the best way, that you honor the past, but also you lead in the future, forward relationally. And so that was, it takes a lot more time, a lot more energy, probably not the most efficient way, but I think it's a lot healthier of a way.
Absolutely. And I love how you're bringing it from the perspective of the guy who, I could definitely relate to, like the guy that did it the other way and then had to make that transition and stuff. And so, man, that's so good. So one of the things that, James, you and I talked about and connected on, you'd made a post a while back about a pastoral shortage. And now you're in it for almost a decade. And honestly, you're kind of like a long-term pastor. While we've got guys out there 30, 40, plus years in ministry, most of the time pastors end up leaving 3 to 5 years and end up transitioning churches or various different things of that nature, completely go out of ministry or, again, go to a different ministry. That was something that seemed to be really important to you and just kind of weighed on your heart when I read that post about it. Talk about that pastoral shortage, what you've seen, what made you really kind of ride on it whenever you put that out there.
Well, I think all of us, but I've seen this really up close. Like I've had multiple of my mentors and guys that I respected, loved, fall out of ministry. And then I'm like, man, whether it was scandal, whether it was burnout, and I'm like, what happened? And, you start looking into it. Then as you pastor, you start seeing these characteristics in you. But I started noticing I had a couple friends that fell out of ministry, and I remember they reached out to me broken and just, felt ashamed. And, I can't believe that they, were a statistic, and, and I just I just reached out to them and let them know I still love them. I'm here for you, and value that relationship. And as we talked, I said, what do you think were some of the things that that led up to this? Because really, I think as all of us would agree, no one really just falls. It's this gradual, we let things go. We stop being disciplined. We stop, seeking after the having the heart of God. Ministry becomes a chore. Study. The reason I'm opening the Word is to prepare sermons and meetings, and our hearts grow cold, but no one really sees it for a long period of time. And then, you start seeing these small little compromises along the way, and it's this gradual fall that leads to this public exposure of the fall. And I said, and I just thought about it. I said, how do we get there? Because I could see a lot of those tendencies in my heart, burnout and frustration and being cynical, and still wrestle with those things today. And so I think a lot of that is what we see is part of the shortage. It's not that seminaries are struggling with attendance, but we're seeing a lot of guys just not making it in ministries for long periods of time. And you're seeing, like you mentioned, churches cycle through pastors quickly. And if you've pastored, you realize when you change pastors, it's hard on the church because you have a different set of leadership styles. I mean, they go through this cycle all over again. And then it perpetuates the cycle even more, because then you have another guy coming in and he's trying to change what this guy already led through. And, and these churches get hardened and they're not going to change. And I think it's just this cycle that we perpetuate. And so when we came here, our goal was to stay, to fight battles, to not give up, to walk through difficult conversations, and to stay and to build and that has brought a lot of scars with it. A lot of pain, a lot of heartache. But I think a lot of guys are burned out. I think there's a lot of factors into that. I think there's a lot of hats that a pastor has to wear that you're not necessarily prepared for when you prepare for ministry. I think leadership, finances, counseling, administrative work, all of this, preaching is about 5%, and that's the easy part in a lot of the sense.
Yeah. Oh man. I tell people, I said, if all I had to do was preach on Sunday. Yeah. No, I'd do this forever. Yeah. It would, it's something that, because that's really, if we could take a step back for a moment, you mentioned seminaries. That is what seminaries are training guys to do, is to preach and study. They get an undergrad in some religious studies, or depending on what Bible college or university they go to, and then they go into an MDiv, which a lot of churches are looking for in a pastor. And what this is my personal opinion here, seminaries and guys going after MDivs and things, especially starting out in ministry. If you're someone who's been in ministry forever and you want an MDiv because you want to increase your theological knowledge base, go for it. But if that's what you're doing to prepare for ministry, you're preparing yourself to be an academic and a theologian, not a pastor. Right. And while that's part of pastoring, again, if preaching's 5%, well, what about the people aspect? And how many, call it leadership, you can call it servant, you can call it shepherding classes, whatever you want to call it. How many of those are in our seminaries? How many of those are there to talk about, hey, how do you look at a budget? How do you run a finance meeting and things like that? Because my doctoral research, when I first started the program, I wanted to study the development of men for ministry and what's going on there, and how, the local churches could do a better job at preparing men for ministry. And then as I got into the candidacy phase to do my actual projects and end up writing my portfolio, I changed from studying how we're training men for ministry, because God kind of put in my heart as I was preparing for that. And I started asking the question, instead of training men for ministry, what if we trained men to be followers of Jesus? Then they would be ready for ministry. And so I think one of the downfalls, or one of the problems with the pastor shortage, is we're not, it's like we're trying to develop our youth and even our men in our church to fit this mold of a pastor that seminaries or the last 50 years have told us should look like, rather than saying, hey, how about we just let this guy be an individual follower of Jesus? And then as he follows Jesus, he can lead others to follow Jesus.
Well, I love like what you do after Men After God, because my philosophy is, and this is not a shot at anyone at seminaries, but we have almost, and I got to be careful here, because I do value seminary training.
You got a pastor's network. I could say whatever I want, so go ahead.
But I think one of the detachments, and I'll be personal, is what we do with maybe men in our church that show the capability of to be an elder or a leader or can handle, are gifted in the word, is then we detach them from actually the reality of what ministry looks like, and we send them away. And I think there'd be so much more sufficient training in the gritty, let a guy be a deacon, let a guy then have maybe a pipeline of serving in a role of an elder, bring him into some counseling situations and let him gain this experience of what ministry actually looks like. I was meeting with one of our new elders, deacon, elder, he's stepping into that role, and he's like, this is his first year, and he goes, I had no idea actually what went into being like a pastor, the counseling and the weights and the criticisms and the, the barbs that get shot. And so I think a part of that burnout is guys have this rosy view of what ministry actually is. And then they get into it and they get into this church and, they got, I'm going to storm the gates of hell with a squirt gun, and then, then they
have a business meeting. You're like, oh, wait a minute.
An 80-year-old Miss Betty has a sharp tongue and unleashes on you, and you're in tears in your office, like, you're thinking you're going to take the world on for Jesus, and you can't even conquer, Miss Betty.
No, that's it. Oh man, I love that. I absolutely love that. I love what you're talking about, that pipeline there in the local churches. Yeah. There was a Bible college president years ago, I was told, said this, and he said, at their Bible college, they hired pastors to be the professors and missionaries to be the missionary professors, because they wanted pastors training pastors and missionaries training missionaries. And I think that's a phenomenal model. The problem was when the school started to get bigger, they didn't have more pastors to bring in, but they needed or wanted more income from that and wanted to support more students. So they started just hiring some of their own students they graduated. And it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
No, that ain't going to work. And so you're going back to seminaries, though, with like Liberty Universities, where I got my doctorate from. Fantastic program, amazing academics. I've taken classes online that were not amazing academics, but I'll say it for Liberty, they have that. And they've got an MDiv program that I'm sure is very intense. But what I don't find in a lot of the course loads is, again, that practical training. But I will shout out Veritas Baptist College, and then there's some others as well who have the one. Veritas is an online only school, and the intention is, serve where you're at and get your education this way. So you can do what you're talking about while also taking a class here or there to get some credentialing, if you will, for churches that might be looking for that. But what's even better, I think, and I mean, the secular world has mastered this, especially companies like Delta and some others. They want to hire from within.
Right. Yep.
What if we looked at our ministry and not just the young people, but we said, what if the next pastor or the next pastoral staff member is actually sitting in my chairs or in my pew? Yeah. And I'm trying to develop them into that rather than go to the seminary and bring them in.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a post on social media just, a week or so ago, and I said about healthy churches and 5 points about revitalization. And I basically gave my philosophy of pastoring is my aim, my goal is to be wanted but not needed here.
Yeah.
And to develop our church and leaders that they don't need me. Like if I was gone, they wouldn't even they probably wouldn't even miss a beat. It's not dependent on James Bell. It's not dependent on my personality. It's not dependent on my leadership, but then you're still wanted, you're in that. And I think that is a goal that we should all aim for as pastors. And that's hard because.
And that's a culture shift in many established churches.
Yeah.
Some of it is the leadership culture and the way people interact nowadays versus 50 years ago, 30 years ago. Of course, when I say 50 years, I'm thinking 1950. But did you know that was actually longer than 50 years ago? Just talking to my wife the other day, like if we say 20 years ago, it's like, like 1980, 1985. Like, no, like 2005.
My kids asked me the other day, they said, Dad, what was it like in the 1900s?
I've gotten that question. Well, son, sit down and let me tell you about the horse and buggy days.
Like,
oh my gosh. Yeah.
They think of the 1900s, like 1800s for us. Yeah. It's
absolutely. Yeah. No, it's wild.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I mean, and you look at the leadership landscape then, I mean, even churches, secular, everything very much, one man dominant,
Mm-hmm.
top down approach. And that was acceptable. That was culturally applicable. People received it well.
Yeah.
Nowadays, that's not the case, and that's a culture shift now.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the other side, right? So if your pastor comes in and your church is used to what pastor says goes and all hell the pastor, well, but then you've got the other side who says all hell the committees.
Yeah.
And I've got a guy near me I've talked to who has a committee-run church, and oh my goodness, I've told him, I said, dude, I'd left 6 months in with your polity.
Yeah.
I mean, committees on committees, decorating committees, finance committee, all this other stuff. And it's like, how much red tape do you have to jump through to paint a wall?
Yeah.
And it's insane.
Yeah.
But with that being said, while a seminary can't prepare someone for every church polity situation they may encounter, that's the value, again, of raising them up from within, because then they're used to that. And they have their relational investments made already to the people that are there. Yeah.
And that's why I think like a pastor's network, or, like the pastor's connection network, or there's other networks that are great too. There's a lot of good, but I think that is a good filler for those insufficiencies that we might see in a seminary level where it's not getting that. But be able to have a network of pastors that you can reach out to that can talk about these things and navigate these things. And I think that's because I think Barna did a poll, I think it was 2021 but it was like 44% of pastors like have no friend. They're isolated. They have no friends, no mentor, like they have no one to reach out to. And so you carry all those heavy loads, you carry all that counseling, you carry all that criticism. You feel like you can't pour out to your wife because it'll just burden her down and she's already carrying a lot, and then you don't have trusted people in your church to turn to, and you just feel like you carry this load alone. Then you get cynical, and then you start, maybe it's me, maybe I'm the problem. And then, and it's just guys get isolated and they have no one to turn to, no friends, no mentors, nothing. And I think that's a huge part of burnout. And then how do you navigate like the political climate and the tensions? And, you're talking about all the divisive things that we see in our culture, whether it's political or philosophical or, and then you're supposed to have the answer for everything. And, you're supposed to be this YouTube creator and pastor and public speaker and counselor and like,
absolutely.
Then,
the guru of all gurus.
Yeah.
And, man, the expectations, that is one thing, managing the expectations of people and not allowing yourself to try to fulfill everyone's expectations. Yeah. While there are expectations of a pastor that are biblical, that are right, that are not, bad to have, there are some unbiblical ones that are based upon a person's preferences that I think pastors overwhelm themselves trying to meet, rather than saying, hey, this is who I am. Yeah. This is who God made me to be. I'm not this, that, or the other thing. And God's called me to pastor, and I love you. I'll love you if you're here, and I'll love you if you leave. But, I read a great book in the last few months called Necessary Endings. And by read, just so we're clear, I listened to it on Audible, but I still say I read it. Okay. I'm one of those guys. Yeah. It should. And so Necessary Endings, and it was just phenomenal. The way that he explains and talks about, hope, realistic hope versus false hope, and different things of that nature, and navigating endings, and how it's a part of life. We get told so often, don't quit, don't give up, stay, all these different things, that sometimes I believe we begin to follow the advice of man versus the will of God. And while I'm not negating the importance of a pastor staying, that's not at all what I'm trying to say. But in any situation, we have to understand that there comes a point to where you may have to accept, you need to, forgive me for using a poker reference, but you may have to fold the hand to keep playing the game and it's not the same as getting up from the table. And I think too many of us feel that if we give up, if we stop, or if we take a stand and say, well, I'm just not that person, or I can't do this thing, we feel like we're giving up, we're not trying hard enough, when in reality, you're doing exactly what God called you to do, and someone's just expecting something that God's not even looking at for you to give.
Yeah.
And having that perspective so huge. But that's where the network comes in for guys to be able to talk about these things. And for guys that are listening, if you're not a pastor, understand what James said of that gentleman coming up into an elder position of saying, I didn't get the counseling, I didn't get the criticisms, I didn't get all this stuff. There's so much your pastor's not talking about, and he probably shouldn't. I mean, he doesn't need to come out there and
he can't.
No, he can't, because it will turn you against people in your, and now it's fighting, right? What I had someone say this to me. He said, listen, people need to see your scars, but you can't bleed all over them. Or you could show them your wounds, but you can't bleed all over them. And that's kind of where your pastor's at. So make sure you're supportive, ask questions, and let him share with you what he can. And if he can't share with you, don't ask him to share more than he should. Respect his office, respect his integrity, and just be there to support and love him as he does what God calls him to do.
Yeah. The one thing he said to me yesterday that was like a lifeline. He goes, I want you to be able to just be James to me. You don't have to be pastor. You can just be James. And he goes, whatever that is, however that is, you can just be James, and everything you say is completely in confidence. And I'm like, he goes, even to my wife. And I'm like, he came in and created like a space where, because that's the huge relief for a pastor, where you can just go, I don't have to be pastor, and I can just share the wars that have been happening in my soul and my personal struggles and my fears and my inadequacies. And, that was a lifeline. That's a lifeline to a
Oh, absolutely. And I'll say this, James, if you're a guy out there listening, like, man, I want to do that for my pastor, I want to be that guy, get ready.
Yeah.
Be prepared.
Yeah.
Like, don't go do that. Don't go into that lightly of like, oh, I just want to be the friend of the pastor. Like, I almost think being a pastor's friend could be more of a burden than a blessing.
It is.
Because especially if you're looking like, hey, I'll help you carry this weight. Like, well, the ones who lifted up Moses' arms, they weren't just sitting there all happy-go-lucky. Like it was a burden, and it's a weight. So don't go into that lightly. But man, I love that. That's so awesome. You have a guy that did that for you.
Yeah, and he goes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
He goes, I think it's completely ruined me. He goes, but in a good way. He goes, when I was in the church, I thought everything was just going to be, all these people love Jesus and they love each other. And he goes, that's not what it's like at all. And I'm like, well,
I like to say they all love Jesus. They just don't know how to love each other too well. Oh man, there's such truth in that. I love it. All right. So there's this pastor shortage, a number of reasons that could be going into it. I mean, we're talking seminary training, we're talking church culture, men unwilling to accept that, hey, maybe I'm not meant to be the pastor here. There's a number of different conversations we could get into as to why that's taking place. I resigned my pastorate in September of 24. And as someone who's transitioned out of the pastoral role, I want to speak to that for just a minute, James. That transition is extremely difficult. I went from military to ministry. That was easy in a sense. My pastor had a lot of refining to do, and there's probably still more to be done. But stepping away from the pastorate, even as a guy who said, like, I don't have my identity as a pastor and all these different things, like, and I didn't. It's like it didn't ruin me. Yeah. But I will tell you, I walked into a church that I was closely affiliated with and loved the people there, great guys. And I walked, and the first time, it was a Wednesday night, the Wednesday after I resigned, I was in the auditorium. I sat down, and it felt so weird. I mean, I don't know if it's anxiety, I don't know what, but I remember I was saying to my wife, she looked at me, she goes, okay. I said, I need to get out of here for a minute. And so we ended up walking out of the auditorium, went to another group or something. But if you're someone who's transitioned out of the pastorate or transitioned ministries, or, you're thinking about it, first off, don't neglect what God's put it on your heart. If God's, put it on your heart discussing leaving or anything of the nature, find a wise counselor to go speak with people who, and then say this, people who have your best interest at heart, and talk to them about that. God could be leading you away, or there could be some things you're trying to run from that need to get worked out. And both of those are viable scenarios that you have to just explore. The second thing, if you transitioned out of the pastorate, don't do it alone. Just as much as you need friends and mentors while you're in the pastorate, if you're transitioning out of ministry, you need them as much, if not more. I can't tell you the number of times I've texted guys, had guys text me, check in on me, and just make sure I'm good. And, some people who've become really close friends that I can cry with, that I can really vent to if I need to. And I know, like, this is just us, and pray with me, pray for me. And that support has been so huge. But James, your heart and my heart would be to see guys not leave the pastorate if that's God's will for them to stay.
Yeah.
And that's where the network came in. Now, the network really just launched, gosh, what, 4 or 5 months ago?
Yeah.
As of this recording?
Yeah, maybe 4 or 5 months. Yeah, not long. And that was what was kind of surprising. It was like I think I reached out to Thomas, and I'm like, I feel like I sense that like this would be such a huge need, and and there's lots of networks, but like I'm like, we're just a place where you can just it's not necessary, and resources aren't bad, but a pastor can have a relationship with someone, whether it's just a friend or whether it's just like the messenger group of just being able to pull up your messenger and be able to, hey, this happened in our church. And then you have 40, 50 other pastors pouring into you and praying for you and checking in on you and hearing the testimonies.
And relating to you and saying, that happened to me too.
Yeah, you're not alone.
I think that was so huge for me in a number of ways.
Yeah. And I can't tell you how many guys are just like, thank you for just and all we did is we didn't do anything. It was just create a space for pastors to, have a pastor in their life. And there's a lot of cool stuff coming. Like we want to, hopefully to do like regional gatherings. I know we've talked about that, the Zoom meeting, I think Thomas led through, and just creating those spaces for guys to connect on a relational level. And I believe like networking and collaboration and all of that will happen, but first relationship has to come first. And so, but it's just, I can't tell you how encouraging it is for me to see guys like have a space where they can pour out their heart, and then just see other guys just, like you said, I've been there, I've walked through that. This is, and share what God, gold. To me, like some of the stuff they share is just like, man, I wasn't even the one struggling, but I saved what they wrote. I'm saving that for later.
I'm going to need that one day.
Yeah.
I just know it.
Yeah.
So let me come back to it.
So it's just been an invaluable resource, and so.
And the network, just like your church, you were talking a little bit offline about your ministry and missionaries and things going on there, but the network as well, I think you've mentioned it, and if I'm saying too much, stop me. And we'll go a different direction. But you've talked about potential trips and interactions and engagement with the international pastors, and not just missionaries. While missionaries obviously welcome, but with national leaders, pastors, and ministry leaders in other countries that you're kind of partnering with and helping. In fact, I think there was a guy from India on a call that I was a part of just a few weeks ago. Yeah.
So we work with, so you've seen me mention 10-9 Ministries, great ministry, but they do a lot of international work. And my heart has been not only to connect pastors here in the States, but also internationally. And to be able to, and I know like Calvin Hauser is with Refresh Network.
Refresh Network,
It's similar Lifeline. There's guys from like Live Global in the network, and there's guys, Core Missions, Ben White and TJ, and them guys over at Core Missions. There's this heartbeat of connection of pastors, not just within the States, but also internationally, and like coming alongside guys that are in, countries like Thailand, Pakistan, India, and being able to help them and not just like come over and take it over, but to equip and to empower and to, come alongside them. So like I would love, like in the next year or so, I'd love to take a group from just the guys in the Pastors Network and go. I have a good friend, his name's Yupo in Thailand, and he does a leadership ministry in Thailand and oversees like leaders, and he creates these opportunities for guys to speak about leadership and pastoring and equipping to thousands of pastors. And David Livingston in India is the same. And so our church, we've kind of are shifting our missions away from now, if you're an American missionary, don't get mad at me. I got seminaries and American missionaries mad at me today.
This is it. All right. And Miss Betty too.
Yeah. Miss Betty.
You're really racking them up. Have
She's
fun,
been
buddy.
mad at me though. Miss Betty's been mad at me.
We're going to post James's personal cell phone on our show notes for everyone who's upset with him to call.
But we're going to be doing a pastoral training through Zoom as our church. And because I've realized like a lot of times in our church, missions is detached. If you're not really, it's hard to keep a passion for missions in your church because it can be detached. It can be letters. And so we're going to be doing like pastoral training through Zoom, where we'll be pulling their pastor, them into our service, and then we'll be doing a pastoral training. And I'm inviting our congregation to be a part of that, because it helps them to really get a global view of ministry and missions that their church is actively doing. And so we're going to be doing that with nationals, along with serving and partnering with American missionaries, but just a little bit of a difference. And so it's been awesome, like in the network, connecting with guys from all over the world. And I would love to see that, especially like a group of guys from the network to go, hey, we're going to go on a trip together. And just, going on a trip together would, rekindle their heart, do a lot of healing. There's a lot of stuff that it's not just going to be ministered to, that there'd be a lot of ministry happening and just going together as a group of guys. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. I love it. I love the fact that Pastors Connection Network, it's here. It's able to fill a space and meet needs. Great guys involved with that. I know you mentioned Thomas. It's Thomas Osterkamp, Got a Great Podcast, a family meeting podcast is the name of it. If you guys want to check that out, we did an interview with him last year. Yeah. Him and his wife published their book. I can't remember the name of it, but they just did. They've got a 31-day devotional for spouses, and that's going to be an exciting one. I can't wait to get my copy. Yeah. But he's on there, and he was doing prayer calls. I don't know if he's going to do those weekly, but so much to look forward to and things going on. And so James, if let's take like 5 minutes, man, and just talk to the guys for a minute. If you had the opportunity to stand on a platform in front of your Pastors Connection Network, talk for 5 minutes, and again, we'll go back and forth if you need to, but let's talk about family and the value of that. And then just the importance of that friendship. And we've kind of hit on it all, but if you had like major value adds for those areas for pastors in ministry and family and in just those connections, relationships, what are some things you'd say to these guys? Yeah.
You're not the savior of your church. Jesus is, and you're limited. He's not, he has all powerful. You're not. And you have to accept your limitations. So many guys, they push themselves because they try to meet everyone's need, and they somehow think that that's their job, is to meet everyone's needs. And it is the fastest way for you to get burned out and cynical, because you'll pour yourself out, and to be betrayed, hurt, aligned, you name it. And you'll soon realize you're not, but from the very beginning, realize you're not enough. You're not the savior. It's not you that people need. It's and so understand your limitations as a pastor, and accept that and set boundaries. And I tell my church all the time, while I have a lot of young ones home, and in this season of my family, I'm going to be a good pastor or a bad pastor so I can be a good dad. And I say that right from the pulpit.
That'll preach.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
that'll preach right there.
Yeah. And you're going to be disappointed, because I'm not going to be at every coffee meeting or small group or ministry team meeting or whatever. I'm going to be home, and I'm going to go to my kids' games, and I'm going to make sure my wife has her husband home, and she doesn't think my ministry is my mistress, and that she knows that she's number one in my life, Yeah. And so that might, to the perception of my congregation, be like, well, you're not a good pastor. So be it. Because you only have one family. You'll have many opportunities for many ministries. And
I think last time I checked, the Bible said that husbands love their wives like Jesus loved the church, not to love the church like Jesus loved the church. Man, I think there's such wisdom what you just said. One of the things I'll say to this, and especially as we talked earlier about, you go into different cultural dynamics and expectations of the pastor, and churches always want a young pastor. We want a young pastor, bring in young families, this, that, and other. That's fantastic, but do you understand what that means?
Right.
Like, are you in a ministry where you have a young pastor and you're so grateful you have a young pastor and he's vibrant, he's full of energy, he's got fresh ideas, but he's not going to be at every event, and he might not be able to answer all your questions. Do you understand what comes with that? Yeah. And are you ready to be a part of that? Yeah. And man, that is gold.
Yeah. And a lot of guys, early on, I didn't have the courage to lead my congregation initially like that. And I remember there's a turning point in my ministry when my wife goes, do I have to make an appointment to have a conversation with you? And I'm like, oh, ouch.
Oh, yes, you do. But that hurt.
Yeah. Check my calendar. Check in with my assistant. Don't say that.
Call my assistant. Oh, guys, don't ever say that. Don't do that.
And that's a bad idea. Just a little bit of transparency. A lot of these things are lessons learned through failure, and failure as a pastor, you're going to fail. Admit your failures to your church. A lot of guys are afraid. I can't tell you how many times I've apologized to my congregation publicly. You know, hey, I didn't lead well here, or I was burned out and I got cynical, and I'm sorry I wasn't. Lead with humility and transparency, you know, and leading like that will cover a multitude of your insufficiencies, you know, because they know that you're just like them. You're made of clay. You're not the savior, that you're constantly stumbling and failing towards Jesus, just like them. And that will do wonder. I mean, that will change your ministry completely.
And James, I'll say this real quick, and then we'll wrap this up. That I 100% agree with you. Lead that way, and then be ready for those that aren't full of grace.
Yeah. Yep.
And then be ready for those that are who don't see that as helpful. Yeah. And they're there. And guys, I wish they weren't. I wish we could say that every church is going to hear that and go, oh wow, okay, he is like us. Look at the humility, look at the grace, and I really appreciate him, you know, repenting like that. Some will. Yeah. And there'll be some that won't. Yeah. And so be ready. Oh yeah. And that's where James was talking about those barbs that get thrown at you. You wouldn't believe. And then, man, James, we'll close it up with this one. Get your family ready. Because one of the most loneliest positions in a church is the pastor's wife. Yeah. Especially when they're mad at the pastor. Because just because she's attached to you, that's going to be a problem. Yeah. And, you know, prayerfully, it's not a church-wide thing. That's a whole other discussion. But it'll be ones and twosies, a group here and there. And I'm sure, James, you've been there for almost a decade. You've had your own, you know, every so many years, every so many months, just depends on how it's going. You know,
I could handle years. I was thinking months.
it's when it's months, right? Yeah. Yeah. And you know, guys, if you're listening to this, you're hearing how James and I laugh about this. Look, there's hurt, there's betrayal, there's frustration, there's love, there's care, there's bitterness that's been worked through. And James and I aren't the only ones who can attest to this. There's so many. I mean, Tom Rainer just put out an email about a month or so ago, as the time of this recording, called "The Anatomy of the Firing of a Pastor." And I read through it. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. And then you see the comments from people like, no, this is it. It's exactly what I walked through. Exactly it. Yeah. And so, guys, the life of a pastor, I had someone tell me this coming up in ministry. And he said, you don't know what it's like to be a pastor until you're a pastor. And I remember young and dumb, mid-20s, thinking, I got this. Yeah. What are you talking about? I've watched you enough. Like, no, I get it. Yeah. No clue. Yeah. And, oh, man.
And God will send you Miss Betty's to humble you.
A couple of them. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, man. Oh, James, this has been great, man. I'm so glad we finally got to connect. Yeah. I really am going to put an ad out for James's assistant because he needs one. Yeah. And he's got a lot going on, loving his church family, taking care of his family, got the Pastors Connection Network. And I really appreciate, what you're creating there. I look forward to being a part of it in any way that we can. And, guys that are listening, I know we're going to share this in that network group. But we got a great guy here, and let's make sure we're loving on him, caring for him, supporting him, and being there with him in this. James isn't a guy that wants to get put up on a pedestal by any means, but all of us can attest to the fact when we try to do something for the Lord, there's always an attack coming. And so let's keep him in prayer. Let's make sure to be there for him and his family. And then most importantly, for each other. Yeah. That's why the network exists. Reach out, engage, talk, share. And yeah, man, I can't wait to see what God does with this thing, man. All right. Exciting. Any final words of wisdom? 30 seconds. What you got?
You're not alone, man. Whether you're
not alone,
you're a man. A lot of this, we have to go to war with each other, and it's a lot of soul. We go to be there. For whether with the men of God or with pastors. We do battle together, and it's messy and it's painful, and but that's where grace is found, man. I love to see it. I love to see it in men in our church, and I love to see it in pastors, and we need more of it. As men, we don't need to walk alone. And I think that's vital to understand.
Love it. Awesome, James. Thanks so much. Guys that are listening, I hope you enjoyed this interview. I know it was a blessing to me. I'm sure it'll be a blessing to you. If you haven't followed us on Facebook, go to facebook.com/TheMenAfterGod. We updated that over the last month or so as we switched over from just a podcast to a men's ministry development organization. When you hear this, we should be fully launched. We've got our men's ministry membership program, where if you're a men's ministry leader and you're looking for coaching and resourcing and things of that nature, we're happy to be available for you. You can go to menaftergod.net. menaftergod.net, get more information about that. And then if you do want to join, we've got our network for Men After God. It's called the Men After God Network, facebook.com/groups/Men After God. And that's an opportunity for laymen, for pastors, for anyone to be in there and talk about life and talk about men's ministry, talk about the things that are going on, for us to pray for one another. And I'm excited about what God's doing in and through that, and look forward to what he's going to continue to do. James, I hope you have a great day, man. Stay blessed. And to everyone listening, we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Men After God podcast. We hope today's discussion has encouraged and equipped you on your journey. We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions, comments, or would like to partner with us, please reach out at support@menaftergod.net. Stay connected with our community by liking our Facebook page at facebook.com/menaftergodpodcast. For deeper engagement, join our group at facebook.com/groups/menaftergod and connect with other men pursuing God's heart. If you found value in this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. Your feedback helps us reach more men striving to live faithfully. Until next time, stay strong in the faith and continue pursuing after God.